16th, 2012, City of Reno Planning Commission workshop on Todd corridors. If I get everybody to rise, please join me in the Pledge of Allegiance. Let's start it here. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Michelle, can we have roll call, please?
Kevin Weisky.
Here.
Dennis Romeo.
Here.
Doug Kaufman.
Here.
Patty Egan is absent. Buzz Harris.
Here.
Dagny Stapleton. Here. And Jason Woosley.
Here. Thank you. Michelle, I'm kind of shooting from the hip because I don't have a copy of the agenda in front of me. Next should be public comment. If I get out of sequence, just let me know. Never mind, I got a copy. Public comment. Is there anyone here this evening who wishes to speak on public comment outside of the Todd workshop basic discussion? Michelle, do we have any requests to speak for us for public comment?
No, we do not.
Okay, with that, I'm going to close public comment, bring it back, and open up discussion and direction to staff regarding Todd corridors, and we will get started with a staff report.
Thank you. Thank you, everybody, for coming tonight. I'm Claudia Hansen, Planning and Engineering Manager for the Community Development Department. We have set up the room in a way so that we can have a more informal discussion, more of a hands-on, going through the code, looking at the maps. You all have a packet in front of you with code sections, the pertinent code sections, the top one being the base MU zoning district, and then each of the overlays attached to that behind it. And then in the back of the packet, you have a map of each of the districts. And I would like to just have, as informal as the chairman is comfortable with, to have a discussion about where the boundaries should be, what code sections work or don't work, and really just to go through it from front to back. And I was not at the last meeting, but I did watch the DVD, and there were many general statements made, and I'll just pick on parking. There was, many people came up and said there's an issue with parking, but I didn't really get any details from that. Some people say there's too much, some say there's too little. A couple of people described their specific situations that might have not been working for those current businesses, but if anybody has specific suggestions on how to deal with the parking situation, with the parking standards, I should say, then we would love to hear that direction and those comments. Everybody has the packet. That and just catch the eye of the chairman if you do have a comment. There's markers in front of you, and we have representatives from regional planning and RTC and a government class and some planning consultants from the area. So I think we have a great group here. So let's get started. I don't know if you want to start with boundaries or with standards. Boundaries might be the easiest one to look at, first of all.
Sure, Claudia. And I just want everybody to know, I don't want to wait and call people out for discussion. You've got multiple microphones on your tables. Let's not speak over everybody because Michelle does have to put some meeting minutes together. But if you would, every time you've got a comment to add, to say, a question to ask, whatever, just grab a microphone, make sure it's turned on, state your name for the record, and, you know, the mic is yours. There's no time limits. So I just want it to be very relaxed, very comfortable, and get everybody kind of involved at every level that we can get involvement. Same goes for the commissioners, okay? Because that's where we're at tonight, is discussing details. Claudia, I'm going to let you go ahead and go down the list in the form that you want to, and get started. Go ahead.
Okay, and just to remind, this is being televised just like a regular planning commission meeting, so it is being recorded, and so we will be able to watch later as well.
Claudia, I have one question first.
Yes.
Do these TODs have any effect on the RTC funding at all in those areas, or?
I don't believe so, but I would look to Patrice if she knows the answer to that.
Can you clarify what you mean about RTC funding?
Would you state your name for the
Oh,
record,
sorry,
please?
Patrice Ecola, RTC.
Do the TODs either get more funds or less funds, or is there some type of consideration for these TODs by RTC when it comes to funding bus stops or roads or anything? I mean, is there a difference between a TOD and a regular area in Reno?
So the way I see it, is there a difference as far as RTC is concerned between a TOD and a regular regional road? Because that's what
Right.
we work with, regional roads. The only difference that I could see is that there may be a higher traffic volume on the TODs versus various regional roads. So what we focus on are the numbers, the ridership numbers. So if, for instance, the Virginia Street corridor is a TOD, that's our busiest street. That's our busiest regional road. So we would focus more attention, which we have with our grand opening from our stations yesterday. And if we work with Sparks, and Sparks identifies 4th Street, Prater, as a potential TOD, then we would look at that corridor, and we're doing that currently with a corridor study for another potential TOD, i.e. BRT route. So the only real focus that we additional focus that we have would be the numbers of ridership. Am I answering your question?
The number of ridership or the traffic count?
Well, it's
So-
ridership, because we would focus on enhancing the TOD with public transportation.
Okay.
We also, RTC would be more than happy to come forward to the Planning Commission and give a presentation on our concepts of TODs if you are at all interested. So I'm putting that out there. Thank you.
If I could, Mr. Chairman, just additionally, for the record, Sienna Reed with Truckee Meadows Regional Planning.
Thank you, Sienna.
More broadly, as centers and TOD corridors are defined in the regional plan, one thing that we've noticed, at least at the federal level, and RTC, I imagine, has experienced a similar issue, is that federal funding is beginning to focus much more on sustainability and livability. And transit-oriented development is really one piece of a sustainability strategy that many communities are turning to. And so when you're going after scarce federal funding in terms of, a grant application, it is something that helps our region to compete. It doesn't mean that the boundaries have to stay the same, but when you have a community that is committed to some multimodal transportation options, some alternative lifestyles in terms of, walkability and mixed use, it does help us be competitive. And, for instance, we submitted a grant application through the Sustainable Communities Regional Planning Grant Program and received preferred sustainability status. And the TODS was a component of that we mentioned as part of that grant application. So that's a little bit more broad way to think about how TODS may help the region obtain funding in the future. Sorry.
But, which brings up a point in my mind. If that's kind of what we're talking about, it'd be helpful, I think, for us commissioners to maybe see, I don't know, the different roadways and, you know, major roadways, and I guess what ridership is. What, you know, I don't know what the difference between an example of, say, McCarran or Moana versus South Virginia. So is there a difference? Is there, you know, and I think that might help us define what are actually TODs and what aren't. An example is, you know, way down on DeMonte, that ridership might fall off, be 25% of what it is at Moana and South Virginia, as it is different from DeMonte in South Virginia. Does that make sense to?
So
I
you'd
mean-
like to, something that shows where the existing routes are and the level of ridership in those areas?
Yeah,
Would that be beneficial?
Yeah, even, you know, maybe the top, you know, top 5 or maybe it could be a colored map or, you know, but at least to give us an idea when we talk about, you know, shrinking down TODs and so forth.
Okay.
And a good example of that would be the last meeting we had. You know, there was a bus stop right in front of, and I think it was on Lemon Valley or Stead, but there was literally no bus service there. Yet that was in one of the TODs. You know, and I mean that we could have the bus stop, but if it doesn't make sense, you know,
Right.
if we're not servicing that, or RTC isn't servicing that, then I think we need to take a strong look at
And I
that.
think that's a great lead-in to looking at the maps. Because I think that's the discussion we need to hear tonight. And I will speak for Patrice in this, that I'm sure she can get us that information. Toot sweet.
And Patrice, I think where Commissioner Kaufman is coming from is the same concern and ideas that I had that particularly came out of the last workshop, and that was, if you look at page 17 in the maps.
And these are sections from the master plan, so the numbers don't go in order. They're just the maps
Right,
coming out of the master plan.
that's why I'm going off of a
Yeah.
page number.
Okay.
And I'm just going to pick on that one because that was one that was heavily discussed about, you know, why is this a Todd corridor? We have a 6-lane highway south of DeMonte, or it grows to a 6-lane, it's 55 miles an hour, that type of thing. And not that there isn't good ridership, maybe in RTC's opinion, we're not taking anything away from that ridership, but why is it a Todd corridor? What makes it a Todd corridor? And before I think that we would do more than point out that this is the southern boundary, a southern Todd that we would like, based upon the last workshop, see maybe removed, and the south end of our corridor end at Del Monte. Make sure that we're doing the right thing based upon ridership. So we need that information from RTC is the bottom line, I think. Does that make sense?
Yeah, Patrice Eckel again. It does make sense. There are two things that need to be factored in. Our regional plan is a long-range plan. So when we designate certain areas for specific roadway projects, it's based on long-range projections. So this Todd corridor was put into place, I don't know how long ago.
2002. It was
And
worked on from
Those long-range
2001.
projections were when we
2007
were-
is when this one was adopted.
Oh, this one was? Okay.
Well, we had higher numbers
Right.
than we have
Yeah,
now.
absolutely.
So we are going back and we are readdressing our numbers. So with that, things may change, but there was Redfield, the Redfield project slated to go at the south end of this.
Right? And there was an increased campus down there. I remember
That's true.
a lot of us worked on those, on this project when it was just in its infancy stages. So that's why, even though I'd like to see some modifications, I'm not too excited about getting rid of anything in particular, because I understand why we set up these broad parameters, and they may not work for us today, but they may in 2030 or 2040 or 2050. But how do we better manage them today.
And going back a
go
little
ahead.
bit, you said how these were established. A lot of them were the numbers, development that was approved. And also, we have the regional centers out there, which we're not reviewing through this process. But the concept was that all of the regional centers would be serviced at least closely, somewhere nearby, by a Todd, so that you could get to a regional center by transit and through some improved design or streetscape to get to those regional centers. And Redfield is a regional center, is still a regional center for the shopping center. It has an improved casino down there, the medical facility, the school. There are a lot of services down there. One thing that we have discussed on a staff level is to, in this area, since there is quite a bit of development down in this area, Damani, Double Diamond, South Meadows, and then the regional center, is to potentially keep it identified, but back way off on the standards, maybe, minimal, no FAR, no density requirement, just to have, and we throw out there just street trees and make sure that there's a pathway from the sidewalk to the front door. And that's it in the southern portion, just so we know it's still identified, keep it there as future growth area of the Todd, but just keep, and it could be anything in those, as the standards, but just keep it minimal to the some standards like that.
Okay?
Mr. Chair, is that something we have to, I mean, all Todds today have the same standards, so this would be introducing a new?
They're similar.
And
Similar
then-
standards.
So you're proposing maybe having, drastically different requirements for each Todd?
Well, we have the base zoning district, so if you look at your code section, we've got the 1808-301, and does everybody have, there should be copies around, 1808-301, and the MU base zoning are the zoning standards, or the development standards for everything in MU, regional center or Todd. And then, a few pages in, you'll see that each Todd, and the regional centers aren't in here, but each Todd has its own set of exceptions, I'll call them. So they might have a different FAR in certain areas, like the southern portion of South Virginia Todd doesn't have the same FAR requirement as the northern portion, for obvious reasons. And maybe the setbacks are different on certain streets. Landscaping's for the mostly the same. Setbacks are similar. And a lot of them are similar enough, setbacks and landscaping, that we could merge all those and make them the same. And that is something that I heard repeated when I was listening to the last meeting, is that there's too many differences between each one. So things like landscaping, parking, we should be able to bring those to a more common standard. Did that answer your question?
I'll have some more later.
Okay, I'm sure.
Yeah. Claudia, Doug, Commissioner Kaufman. And that's one thing that we heard loud and clear at the last meeting. And I guess some of the planners, I guess I kind of expected you guys to speak up, but basically they said they jumped through hoops instead of, having one standard or trying to make it easy. A client comes in and there's so many different ones and where they go, and then, it's difficult, for the business side of the city to actually direct this client, their client, on what they can do and what they can't do and what changes and what doesn't. And so I guess
How about some
my
input from
goal
some
would
of the
be-
planners?
Well, my goal would be, to simplify this as all Todds as much as we can.
And we did do that in one step, but I think we can go a lot more. Ken, you can join us at a table if you like. Come on up. These, as Chairman Weisky said, these were, the first one was adopted, I think, in '02, which I think was the airport was the first one, and the last one was done in, I think, 2010. So where we were coming from is completely different, and every working group is completely different, whether we were working with just the airport or the students at the university or the property owners on South Virginia Street. Everybody had completely different ideas, and so that's why they are kind of all over the place. And we condensed that a couple years ago, but I think you're right, we need to do it again. and simplify it even more.
Okay, thank you.
I don't know if, John or Mike want to jump in? Either.
I'll jump in. Melissa Lindell. I think that there's a couple different concepts that we can think about is, do we want to look at the long-term concept of the TODs, which what do we want to focus on and how do we want to get to down to these centers, which kind of leads the argument leaving them kind of in a, where they are. The other argument says, what should we really be focusing on? And if we made them a little smaller and had the standards apply in the compact area where the urban growth is and where we want to incentivize and really focus development, maybe we could see more bang for the buck if the areas were smaller. And otherwise, you know, it's not to say if the areas are reduced that we're saying that we're discouraging transit down there or RTC isn't going to send a bus, but maybe we could focus on some areas that might really make a difference.
Yeah, can I jump in?
Absolutely.
Commissioner Romeo, I think that Melissa said something there that struck a chord with me. At the last meeting, I'm an advocate of shrinking, and that doesn't mean that there's not stations down at Redfield. I mean, the bus ridership, the people are going to go to Damani, they're going to go to the Redfield campus to school, they're still going to ride that. We shouldn't be writing a development ordinance based on bus ridership. I think it should be based on what we're actually trying to do, and that's intensify the core area. And quite frankly, if we could just focus on one for right now, the South Virginia Todd's a good example. It doesn't work anywhere past maybe Moana Lane. Do you really want the 30 units per acre or greater anywhere down there? You're on a 6 or a 7 lane, 50-mile-an-hour highway down there. I don't think it works. And if we're stifling the development, they're never going to get to that density. And I don't think we want it down there. If you have a transit station, people can go to the stations and still ride the buses and still do all that, but it doesn't have to be a Todd corridor. The RTC can still have those stations. And I think that the limits to the Todd as far as south, north, east, and west are as critical as limiting the restrictions on it and doing away with the floor area ratios and doing something that the police really want us to do, and that's stop putting the buildings with the backs to the street because they can't patrol. They have to actually drive into those developments. The police have written us letter after letter after letter saying it doesn't work for law enforcement. It's putting an extra burden on the limited officers that we have out there on the street. So I don't know where you want to start on that, but I would like to start with some limits. Let's say it doesn't go past McCarran to the south or Moana to the south or wherever it makes sense to work and get some input, then go to the next one and deal with the next issue after that.
Okay, so on the southern portion of South Virginia Todd, I think it's pretty clear to scale way back or potentially eliminate that area.
Ken Crater just showed up, and I remember Ken's comments quite vividly from last month, and I thought they were very good comments about this section of the existing Todd in particular. And I kind of marry that with what Claudia just said a minute ago. I don't know that we need to get rid of the Todd corridor in that area completely, but we don't need the current standards that are there. And so why don't, and Ken, if jump in anytime, grab a microphone, and share some of your thoughts again from last month. But I really respected what you had to say, and I think that maybe our Todd corridor design parameters, if you will, are too tight for that area. Why do we want to put buildings right on the street on a 6-lane highway? Why do we want to have multi-use or whatever in that area? But that doesn't mean that it's not a Todd corridor and that we don't leave it a Todd corridor for future development and future ideas rather than recreating the wheel. Ken?
Yeah,
Please.
and again, Ken Crater. I agree exactly with what you're saying. There's two different ways that I could see this going. One
is to scale back the standards within the TODs, certainly within those outlying areas. The other is to shrink the TODs, and there's pros and cons to each. But for someone that's been doing actual development projects for several years now, basically since the recession started, you know, where things stand today is it's really difficult to make a project pencil because even with the recession, you know, it's still hard to find good land for under, say, $8 to $10 a square foot, even within a busy corridor like South Virginia Street. And the other thing that's happened is rents have come down, retail rents, office rents. You know, in a good high-volume center, you easily used to be able to get around $2.80 to $3 a square foot in the peak. Well, now you're lucky to get $2 a square foot, even in a premier center. And so what developers are looking for today is as much flexibility as possible to make a project pencil. And what that means is flexibility in how you lay your buildings out, what your floor area ratio is, what your density is, what sort of development standards you have. And I think, you know, by and large, the majority of developers in the Reno Sparks area want to do a quality development. I don't think there's any doubt about that. But some of the standards like the FAR requirements, which I know you've seen countless special use permits or variances to change those, so that doesn't make any sense. The same goes with density standards. Is a developer is going to look at a piece of property and try and maximize the value and make it pencil, and he's going to do that by looking at, hey, does it make more sense in this center to have two-story units at 14 dwelling units per acre, or three-story units where I can get maybe 18 or 19 dwelling units per acre? Is this going to be a place where maybe if I have a couple pads with drive-throughs, I don't have as high of a floor area ratio, but I'm going to get more money for those pads and be able to make it work? So I think in moving forward for probably the next at least 5 to 10 years, we really, I think, ought to focus on coming up with design standards that allow that flexibility and get rid of a lot of those rigid requirements. Like Dennis was saying, the requirement to have your buildings right on the street. Well, sometimes it makes sense. I've done a bunch of layouts where it's nice having a couple buildings on the street, but not to the extent where then it messes up your whole layout in the back and creates more financial hardship for you. So I think if we can back off on some of those standards for the next 5 or 10 years to get our economy going again, because there's still a lot of folks that are looking to the Reno Sparks area to bring their businesses in, a lot of good retailers, there's a lot of national apartment builders out there, and rents, but like another 10% increase in rents, which will happen in the next year or two, and you're going to start seeing some more apartment projects come forward. So we're kind of at that critical juncture right now where I think if we scale back some of this stuff, you could probably even keep some of those TOD areas, because someday, I mean, we're all hopeful and I think all confident that this community will continue to grow. We'll start to get more density along those corridors, which makes perfect sense. And I'm the biggest advocate here for providing density and getting rid of suburban sprawl, because that's always the net plus for the city. So I think that we can kind of achieve what everybody wants to see. Either way, it's really going to be the decision of the board. But for now, if we can just greatly scale back those standards, give the developer flexibility, or if it's the decision of the board just to scale back the TODs, then I think you also need to look at then what happens to all those properties that are currently zoned MU in the TOD that now go out of the TOD. That's going to be a lot of additional work too. So I wouldn't even have any problem keeping the TODs as long as the standards make sense. And as I said in my last meeting, I'd rather have to come forward with a special use permit on every single project and convince you, the neighborhood, the stakeholders, that it is a good project than have to meet some arbitrary design standards that just simply don't make sense in my project. And one last thing, I think a really critical thing we've got to look at as a community is better signage. And I know we all shot ourselves in the foot, you know, in the 70s and 80s with lousy development and ugly signs. But as long as the signs architecturally integrated within a building, signs work. And in fact, I've got some handouts I'll give you in a little bit. I was involved in a project in Carson City where there's a Home Depot and a Walmart down there, and there was a sound wall blocking visibility. We worked with NDOT, got that sound wall removed, put in a 65-foot tall pylon sign. Business increased 50% because of that increase in visibility and the increased signage. And I also spoke with a guy with Pacific Neon Sign in California. California has been greatly increasing the allowable sign height and sign area because they see that it works. And as long as they're high-quality signs that fit with the building, they drive traffic to your store. And the other thing that, we learned from Gardnerville, Carson City, is Gardnerville ramped up all their commercial and drew all that business away from Carson City, and Carson City got hit. So let's keep our tax dollars in our community and allow our businesses to prosper.
Okay. Commissioner Stapleton? I know you've been waiting.
I don't have a specific response to that. If anybody else does, I don't want to interrupt that discussion.
Melissa?
Melissa Lindell, I wanted to key off of one thing that Ken just said, visibility. And I've heard time and time again, I've been before you with retail builders and developers that say, visibility is the key. If my customers can't see the front door, can't see any activity, don't feel safe, and can't see that there's a parking space or a way to get into the business, the profitability goes way down, and that keys into Ken and his rents. And visibility, I think, is so important. Again, I did talk to Chief Pitts about this the other night and suggested that he send his design team here. So I would hope that community development staff would reach out to the police department on the visibility thing, because I think it's a safety thing as well. I mean, there's an example in town, the Michael's Bridal Shop area with the Total Wine, where there is Virginia Commons, there isn't any visibility in there, and I think people feel, I feel a little hesitant, geez, what's going on in there? I don't really want to go back in there. It just doesn't make me feel good. But I think that that's one thing that I hear over and over again from retailers. And then the other thing that is also an issue in terms of the visibility is, what do you do with establishments that need truck access and truck loading? Do you visually put that truck loading on the side so you can see it now from the side streets, or do you keep it in the back? If you keep it in the back and your building's in the front, it's an issue. So that's why I wanted to tie into the rents and things with Ken on the visibility. So.
Okay, Claudia, to kind of get, I mean, we've heard some great comments, very similar to what we heard last month. How can we draw this in a little bit tighter so that, do you want to look at it by individual
I would love to.
corridors?
I want to talk specifics.
Let's-
I
okay.
hear the comments and, sorry, go on.
And that's okay. No, you and I are about to say the same thing. That's why we're saying it at the same time. Let's get real specific, okay? There is no disagreement on the comments that we've heard for certain areas. But those comments, just like a Todd corridor, we all come to agree they don't work everywhere. So let's refine all this. Let's get specific, talk about one specific corridor at a time. I don't care which one we start with, but we start with one and be very specific about what works in that corridor and what doesn't work in that corridor, and go down the list. Commissioner Stapleton.
Yeah, I absolutely agree with that, and was going to suggest something similar, but I also wanted to just sort of bring it back to the big picture. Maybe, I don't know if it would be useful as we're beginning this discussion to sort of just go over the basic criteria of TODS and what the goals are, what sort of the vision is that we're trying to accomplish. There was a lot of, there's a lot of great ideas at the last workshop, and one thing I kept coming back to was, let's just talk, I think we should talk about what exactly are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? All of the standards are trying to, create a specific type of design that is doing what? It's increasing walkability, increasing density, promoting ridership, all of these things that are sort of being thrown around. Would it be useful to sort of just do a couple quick goals, just so that gives us a parameter within which we're working? And then I absolutely agree, maybe from there, once we have that sort of vision and goals in our heads. I mean, I know we pretty much all do, but just, you know, to sort of set us off in the right direction, and then to look at each one specifically.
Sure. And Sienna, feel free to jump in here if you would like. But way back to 2002, when we were doing the dog and pony show to all the nabs and cabs in the area, our main goal that we were trying to put out there was the TODs and regional centers. The idea is to create a place, whether that's a small place or a big place, where you can live, work, and play in the same area, or get there by transit or walking, or somehow those elements all relate to each other. So I think although nothing's really a good example on any of this anymore, but a good example at the time was the Plum Lane crossing. So the row housing that went in next to Virginia Lake. So you have the residential, you've got commercial on Virginia. There was a project coming in at Park Lane, and you have the recreation at the Virginia Lake there. So it had all the elements there, not to mention it was on Virginia Street, so you could easily get to downtown or south on transit. So I think that's kind of that's a higher level of overall planning, where they were able to put in all of the elements. They had a large piece of land, which was a major cleanup site, that the police they could just torn down the building and the police would have been fine with that, taking down the Mark Twain Motel. But that was the overall idea, and that was to limit the growth that was going further up the hills. So to keep it more condensed, the services, the residential, the employment opportunities, the recreation, in a more condensed area, and to be able to provide those elements in a community. Tiana,
Can I?
Sienna might want to add.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sienna Reed again. I'm certainly happy to provide any background that I can in terms of, why the centers and TODs came into the regional plan. But I think Claudia really, covered the idea of place well, in that, when the concept came into the regional plan to have transit-oriented development, a system of regional centers connected by transit-oriented development corridors, the idea was to create a different type of place, a place where you can live, work, play, as Claudia said. And I think one of the things that I hear so much in these meetings is that we're all kind of struggling with, we know what the idea is, and we feel like it's not maybe in the right places. And so what are the things that help make a TOD a good place? I think we can look at Midtown and say, oh, there's, wonderful intersection density, there's connectivity, we already have a mix of use. There's some vacant properties, but the properties aren't huge parcels of land that are vacant and, potentially zoned something like industrial. And so in terms of criteria, in my mind, some of those things come into play. They might be a little bit more analytical in terms of, say, density residential, mix of use, just percentages, intersection density. Do you have sidewalks or the ability to put sidewalks in, right-of-way, things like that? I think those are all kind of physical characteristics that can help set an area up to maybe succeed or not succeed. We have a lot of areas that are kind of, on the outlying fringe that, they have huge percentages of vacant lands. They don't have transit planned to get to them anytime soon, whereas there's other areas that are already on RTC's primary transit network. They're on RTC's radar, and they've said, we want to have a commitment to BRT there in the future. So, I don't know. And again, I'm happy to answer any questions you may have on the regional plan background or anything like that.
Thank you, Sienna. Claudia, why don't you just start with, by putting a map up so it can
My
be
notes on it.
put up on the big screen and seen on TV, and the one that you put up is the one corridor that we'll start with. How's that?
Okay. Perfect.
And what I would like to hear, and if staff wants to hear something else, Claudia, please say so, but I think what we, as Planning Commission, want to hear is, are the boundaries okay? And what specifically does not work that you all feel design-wise, should be modified for this specific corridor, and then we'll go map to map to map and go through this.
Okay, so
Okay.
this is the southern portion of the South Virginia Todd. Overall comment that I've heard is that this does not need the standards that are currently in place in the Todds. I have heard a couple people say, well, maybe we take out the standards but keep it a Todd, and not good or bad. If you take out the standards, it's not a Todd. That's what a Todd is, transit-oriented development. So, and that's not, I'm not saying that's good or bad. I'm just saying if you take away the standards, it's not a Todd anymore. We could label it as a potential future Todd, but if you take away the standards, it's not a Todd. That's what makes a Todd.
Okay, so what do the planners and developers think? Here's the one right here that we're going to start with. Let's have some input.
Well, if I can throw something out here.
You just entered, for the record.
Ken Crater.
Thank you.
It's also important to note, and I think this plays right into the South Virginia Transit Corridor, is that there's not a whole lot of developers that are going to spend the money in Reno to do these huge mixed-use projects where they have a big retail component, a big housing component. You're going to get one guy that comes in and does a retail center in a corner, and then another guy that comes in a year or two afterwards and builds a big apartment complex, because now he's got a great amenity for his tenants and having that retail next door. And now maybe there's enough traffic between the retail and the apartment complex to create the need for more transit ridership. So in my mind, someday, you know, I think this will work as a transit corridor, but right now you just don't flat have the residential density. And to me, what defines a Todd is having enough people that live within that corridor to actually walk to shops, to walk to businesses, and that's not there right now. This is strictly a corridor for motorists. And so as Claudia said, if you're going to reduce those standards, well, then it's probably not a Todd anymore. So in my mind, then this is probably a candidate for scaling that Todd back, at least to McCarran, if not to Moana.
And on, I think, adding to what your comment is, I wouldn't necessarily want to take it out of the master plan, because if somebody did want to come in with that high-density development, and not necessarily Todd level or a mixed use, but if they want to build that high density, or they want to build that commercial development, I don't want them to have to go through the hoops again, because we still want development in this area. And so you know, maybe a special use permit or something at that point, but I would not like to change, not necessarily roll back the master plan, so that we know that in the future, development is obviously going to go down this way. I'd like to maintain that identification.
What if if we look at maintaining that, like you say, and we're looking at the future and it is a transit area, what if we have options for flexibility in these areas? Instead of you have to have an FAR of this and you have to have your building on the street, what if you came up with some other things to meet the goals that are more pedestrian oriented or increased landscape? So you almost had a laundry list and say, if you're in this Todd, you can have the mixed use, but instead of having these rigid things, you say, if you meet 3 out of 7 or 4 out of 5 or
So more specifically,
whatever.
because I understand exactly where you're coming from. Now, specifically, how would you rewrite the specifics, the standards?
Well,
What would you offer?
Just one thought, and this is, you know, the others need to jump in, but one thought is if you don't put you can put your building on the street and that meets one. The other is you can, if the landscape standard is 10 feet along the street, if you double it, that would be one. So you could increase the landscaping, increase pedestrian amenities, maybe have some standards like that. Do you have some thoughts?
Mike, hold on one second. Mike?
For the record, Mike Raley. The one thing that comes to my mind, and I kind of agree with Ken, but on the flip side of that, if you don't get some of the higher density residential, and we still see this as a Todd corridor in the future, it's never going to happen. So I think maybe if you can put in some sort of incentives that, yeah, you can do a conventional center, but if you do the higher densities or you get the higher FAR, maybe there's some incentive to streamline the entitlement process or you know, pick up, you know, I don't know how you do that, but to create some sort of incentive to encourage it, but not necessarily mandate it.
Okay.
Hold on. Angela Foos from CFA. Just to echo what Melissa was saying, there seems to be maybe 5 or 6 big items. Density, the FAR, building orientation, parking in back versus parking in the front or the side, sidewalk, location and width, and setbacks. So what if we took those, say, 6 items, and we said, out of those 6, pick maybe 3 that you can meet for your project. We still have good design standards, and we're still meeting the intent of the TOD, but we're not requiring that every project that doesn't meet that go before you for a special use permit.
Okay, so in this corridor, this one specifically, meet 3 of the 6, and that would be the same as meeting all of them in yesterday's world.
That could take you straight to building permit. In other words, you would still go through a review process where you have to have, the planners are going to review it at the building permit process, but you're not going to have to go through the special use permit process, because this is kind of what people are
now,
doing already.
Do we change any of the numbers in the standards?
In this area, yes.
To what?
That's a good question.
I mean, that's the input that's the specific input that
Where are we at
we, the commission and staff, want to hear from you guys tonight.
And what were the, Angela?
To go back to those?
What were the 6, landscape, building orientation, setbacks, FAR?
So, yeah, FAR density, building orientation, parking.
Parking.
Not so much parking spaces, but parking in the back requirements. Sidewalks, meeting that 18-foot sidewalk requirement.
So that's smack, width of sidewalk, not whether you have one, because everywhere requires a sidewalk.
You're going to have sidewalks,
Okay.
right, but maybe you don't have to have the 18 feet. And building setbacks.
Okay, all right.
Would that be for the whole length of the existing Todd, or are you advocating taking it back to McCarran or Moana and allowing the 3 of the 6, but you're still able to, if you choose to build down?
I think we're just
farther?
talking about the southern portion right now.
The boundaries of this corridor
We're just talking about
stop at
southern.
Del Monte.
This is the southern portion, which is Del Monte to the Redfield Regional. It's basically
That's
between
the
the
only one we're
2
talking
regional
about right
centers.
now.
And we may take these same concepts and go into another one, but right now we're just talking about the southern section of the South
So
Virginia Todd.
Right.
Okay.
Chair Weinstein?
All right, and I think I can come up with something on that, on those options in that area. And I think.
And Melissa and I were
Combination of
just
those.
chatting. Something else that we may want to add as part of that is if you do more of something, it also counts as an incentive. So if you do more landscaping than what's required, if you provide more pedestrian amenities than what's required, maybe that's also a piece that you can say, okay, instead of only having to do 3 items, because you provided these extra things, now we're only going to require that you put in, 2 of these design standards instead of 3.
If 0.25 would have been required and you build 2.0,
Right.
then you wouldn't have to do, that would count as 2 of them or something
Right.
like that. Okay.
And that, again, gives people the flexibility that they need, but still encourages TOD development.
Just to add on,
Commissioner
Mr.
Woosley?
Chair.
Hold on, 1 second, Sienna. Commissioner Woosley?
I really appreciate diving into this, and we're talking about the Southern Virginia, but I don't want to waste any of our time by not agreeing later on what we're going after. And the big picture being, are we going to keep these same boundaries and lessen the restrictions, or try to do a combination of both? And I think these are great ideas, but what we want in one area, we're going to want different, we don't want them to have the same choices in a different Todd using the same boundaries. And I kind of want to just make sure that we're all in agreement that we're going to go down this path of maybe having these multiple options of what you can pick from, and you have to pick 3 out of the 7 or something like that. See where I'm going? Giving them an option in this area may not be the same options we want to give them in the downtown, midtown area.
Well, and that's back to my original question. Do we even want to consider this as part of the Todd? If it's, like you said, if it walks like a duck and quacks, it's a duck. Without the conditions, it's not a Todd. So do we even want to call this section a Todd anymore? But I mean, there's transit areas there, but do we just leave the boundaries and allow the development and say that's not that's no longer part of the TOD, it ends at McCarran or Moana. And I think I understand what you're saying. If it is a TOD, it is a TOD. If it's not, it's not. Maybe we should not even consider that.
To expand on that, I think that we can have a successful TOD area, but all transit is not created the same. That we're not going to have the same kind of transit downtown as we are in this long section. So a successful transit area can rely on different types of transit. And it doesn't have to be one cookie cutter mass transit all the way out to Devaney as it does downtown. So you can be able to drive to an area, and then if you have successful foot traffic, bike traffic from there, that could be a successful TOD. It's just different types of transit.
And I think what I've heard from everybody on this side is that this area is going to develop at some point. I think Ken threw out 10 years. And it is going to get there. Mike said, if we don't require something, in the words of a past mayor, if you always build, or you always, what's the statement? I'm going to mess it up now. If you always do what you've already done, you'll always get what you always got. So I think to have some improved standards in there to get us, because if we allow it to build the same way it has, it's never going to be a TOD. It's never going to have the support in that area. So I think that the steps that Angela and Melissa brought forward would get us going in the right direction if it does, or when it does develop into more of a transit area.
So perfect. So then discussion on the table immediately is if we keep the idea that we'd keep the same boundaries and lessen the restrictions. And is everybody in favor of that?
At least in this one, until we
Yeah,
get
and we're
to-
just doing one at a time.
We're just doing this one. Okay.
Sienna, you wanted to add something?
Yeah, Mr. Chair, Sienna Reed for the record. In considering potentially lessening the density and FAR standards, I would like to just point out that those are defined in the regional plan. So if there's a desire to vary those by location, or, maybe pick some priority areas where the standards are, say, higher, maybe have other areas that have more flexibility in terms of a range, whether that be on the density side or, the design standard side. That is something that we do need to consider as a regional plan amendment. So that is a conversation that we would look forward to having as well at the Regional Planning Commission level with the City of Reno and also Washoe County. So I just wanted to point that out.
Okay, thank you. Ken?
Ken Crater, in terms of, what you're going to get in this quarter, I think you can obviously control that by your land uses. And I don't see any reason that you'd want less than 14 dwelling units per acre, for example, in the South Virginia Street corridor. And I think if we got, say, 200 to 300 new two-story, 14 dwelling unit per acre apartment complexes in this corridor in the next 5 or 6 years, a couple of us wouldn't be doing cartwheels. So I think, we're going to be able to control the land, what develops in this corridor by the allowed and prohibited land uses.
Okay.
Okay, move on.
Commissioner Kaufman?
I guess the question I'm going to ask you planners, is this making it more complex for you than simplifying the process? If we go through each one of these TODs like this, is that simpler for you, or is it going to be more complex?
Ken? Go ahead.
And again, Ken
And
Crater.
Angela, go ahead.
I believe that standardization is huge. And I think that all the outlying areas, whether we call them TODs or future TODs, we ought to do everything we can to have the same standards for all, say, those areas outside the McCarran Ring Road, because it's way easier to explain when you got a business owner coming to town and he's looking at, say, 2 or 3 different properties to buy or joint venture with you, if he's looking at basically the same standards. And I don't see any reason why we couldn't, at least in these outlying areas, have very similar standards and not have to have what we have right now as all these totally different standards for every little area in town, and it's a nightmare to weed your way through the code and figure out what the standards are within any one area.
Okay, Angela?
And I think the flexibility options that we just talked about, you could make that a standard for all the TODs, and it would fit. It doesn't have to be specific to just this, South Virginia TOD. It could be all portions of the TOD, and it would work.
Okay. Commissioner Stapleton, did you want
Yeah,
to jump in?
Yeah, I do. I just want to add something to that. I sort of agree with both what Ken and Angela just said, in terms of we need to have enough standardization to where it's clear and simple to be able to implement this. At the same time, I don't think all neighborhoods are standard and the same, and I think that's really important. I think in some of the outlying areas, you maybe could say there's more sort of common development patterns, but especially within the McCarran Loop, I don't think that's as possible. So I think that what Angela's suggesting is to have that ability to have variation so that you're taking into account the specific already built landscape and physical landscape and, traffic patterns and, walking patterns of each individual area that we're talking about.
And I think we'll get there as we go through each one of them.
Okay. And I wanted to add one more thing, also sort of a question in terms of background. As we're approaching each of these individually, would it be useful, I don't even know if we have this information on hand, to sort of look at existing traffic and transit?
Transit lines and ridership?
Right.
Yeah, Patrice is going to bring that at a future meeting.
Just in terms of, as we're looking at each of these, okay, realistically, what exists here? How much, is there transit access here? Is there planned transit in the future? What's the volume of traffic? Is it even realistic that we're talking about walkability, at this intersection that will probably always be, at a very high volume if it's a high volume intersection? Just to sort of, it might be a good place to start for each of these areas to sort of just talk a little bit about transit and traffic, and then also sort of projecting out into the future what's possible, what maybe can be expected in terms of transit options and traffic.
Okay. I flipped it, no going back.
Claudia, Mike, I have a question for you as staff, and I think that we just heard a suggestion that may simplify life. Actually, two different suggestions. One was to have standards A for outside the ring road, standards B for inside the ring road, or mold everything and soften it up so that you hit them in a number 3 out of 7 or 4 out of 7, whatever it may be, for inside and outside the ring road. If we agree that a current section should remain in place, does it matter whether or not you have standards A or standards B, or do they have to be the same in order to maintain that Todd corridor by definition?
I would say on this one, on the northern section of South Virginia, I would say it's fairly important to keep it in place, the current standards, or a simplified version of the current standards. This is, and Patrice, feel free to jump in, I would say this is your priority line, highest ridership. The Rapid just went in this area, spent, I'm not sure how much money on the new stations that just went in here. This has been the focus section of the Todds in the entire area. And I would like to see it maintained, and maybe, I don't know if scaled back, but to maintain the level of standards, whether they're slightly altered or simplified, but to maintain that level in this area. I don't know, and the planners present can correct me, have there been any special use permits in this area to reduce anything?
There hasn't been much development in this
No,
area.
Isn't there one at Toma?
We've had quite a bit of infill. Toma's went to permit.
And how about the other commercial one? Can't think of the name. No. I'm not sure. I'm thinking the Bernie Carter.
Oh, that's what I was thinking of.
The old
Toma.
Delmar Station
Toma?
one, and then
That's
right
Toma.
across the
Okay.
street is
Yeah,
the
that's
Toma.
going to permit.
Okay.
That's, I mean, other than infill projects, there's remodels of existing buildings going on, but they're not necessarily going for higher density on the existing buildings.
Right.
So,
Right.
you know, you're looking at an area here that's built out to,
There's,
I'm
I
gonna
would say there's
I'm
some
gonna say
underdeveloped.
90%?
I would say there's some underdeveloped land in the area. I've been working closely with the representative from Park Lane, and they're fine with the standards. They're going to do a phasing plan.
Okay.
So they're fine. I think there's one awkward thing. I think it has to do more with the, there's an easement going right through the property. I think it has to do more with that. But they don't have any major issues. And I would say that's the biggest piece of
Right,
land
that's
in this
the
area.
biggest piece of land
Yeah.
left. That's where I'm saying there's, you know, 90% of it, the area is already built out. The ridership exists where it exists. You're not really going to increase it by remodeling existing facilities unless they're torn down and you start over with
Right.
them. So,
And another note on on where the boundaries are, between the northern section and the southern section of the South Virginia Todd is the Convention Regional Center. So
Oh,
we don't
that was
have, we don't have a big gap in
question I
standards,
was
but
going to
that's,
ask here.
that's the section that's missing is the Convention Regional Center. We're not looking at regional centers, so that's why one stops at Moana and the next one starts at Del Monte.
okay, so a plan A, a plan, or standards A and standards B could work by drawing the line at the pretty much McCarran ring.
Yeah, McCarran's right in the middle of the Convention Regional Center, so just the northern and southern sections in this case.
Okay,
Yeah.
okay. Ken, you had,
Yeah, I was just going to say again, Ken Crater, that using the ring road makes a lot of sense because the regional plan also uses the ring road in a lot of different ways for development inside and outside the ring road.
And that'll come to play on when we look at the 4th Street one. That's the one that actually, it's the only one that touches McCarran.
And then I also wanted to add one more thing. I am looking at a piece of property to develop on this piece of South Virginia Street, which I can't meet the floor area ratio requirements on, and I can't meet the building frontage requirements on to make it work or pencil. So I can't say which piece of property yet, but there's an example for you.
okay.
I think, Melissa Lindell, that in this area too, I think that there's a lot of areas that have the tight right-of-way and the sidewalks are very narrow, and to do that 18-foot requirement might be a little problematic in some of these tight areas in Midtown.
And we actually already have that addressed in the South Virginia Street standards that Andy Durling was working on. So that's been semi-addressed through there, but we do need to review it on the whole thing.
Well, that's
Yeah.
why, I'm advocating the 3 out of 5, or,
Right.
so
So
you
that-
can, if you have those special problems.
So that would
Get
still
away.
work even in this part of the Todd. If you could meet 3 of the 5 or 3 of the 6, it would still make sense to do that.
I'm thinking so. Ken, would that help you if you had more of a choice?
Yeah, flexibility is good. And I think Angela raised the idea that if you could meet 3 out of 7, then you could proceed to a building permit. If you could only meet 2 out of 7, then you could apply for a special use permit, because maybe you can only meet 1 or 2, but you do a fantastic job with the 1 or 2 items you meet.
Okay.
Okay,
And one other issue that I just remembered when I flipped this was these neat little pink spots here. Those are the gaming locations, and we do have a policy within the master plan that gaming has to be located, new gaming has to be located within a regional center. Existing gaming can be located within a Todd corridor. So we actually can't remove all of the southern portion because we'd be in violation of the master plan.
okay. And we'll come up with that when we discuss the eastern part on Mill Street also. Just to remind a few. Okay, so the conversation we had on the southern section, is everybody comfortable? When I say everybody, I'm talking about you, the general public who are giving us input in this workshop, comfortable with what we have discussed for the meeting a certain number of the criteria, but not having to meet all of it in that southern section? Do I kind of see a a common nod of heads? Is there any issues anybody would like to further discuss? Mr. Kompotic, you're sitting there way too quiet, too casual this evening. You don't have anything to add yet?
On this topic, I definitely like the idea of the flexibility, but until I look at a site, put a building on it, park it, all of that stuff, I can't process that in, you know what I mean, the 2 of 7,
Okay.
3 of 7 kind of thing. I think it's a very good idea, but you got to know that it's going to work. And you know it's going to work when you got a product and a site, and you got to go park it and landscape it and all of that.
Okay,
You see what I mean? So, yeah, I mean, the concept is fine.
thank you.
I have, just since you teed it up with me, I have probably the strongest opinion in this region that we have way too much Todd, that they will never work, and I think we should make them work. I just don't see, I think you start with population forecast, how much you can absorb on Todds, and look at a 20 or 30-year growth plan, and you'd be surprised how few Todds you could really fulfill. I'm talking about in terms of inspiring some redevelopment and having some very focused standards to get the redevelopment and change the behaviors that we want by getting people walking and riding a bus. That's kind of what we're after. And so it's a whole different, I'm just on a, you know, and I think it's nice to talk about these standards, but I just think until we get the location of the Todds down, then we're going to be fighting standards.
Okay, thank you.
You bet.
Mike?
If I can add just one thing to what John said, and I think John kind of hit the nail on the head, as far as I'm concerned about being able to support huge areas of Todds with the existing population base. But I think Claudia also got it right that this is an area really where I think if it's going to work in the short term, this is probably it. And I like that idea of keeping that flexibility, because I think keeping this in the Todd actually gives some incentive to some of the older properties that are built out to redevelop, where I think you could get the higher densities, and it will, you're already seeing it in Midtown, the trickle-down effect of, you know, soup goes in and it spurs Midtown Eats, and it, you know, it's just kind of moving down the street. And I think this will help keep that momentum. So, yeah, the flexibility is a good thing, but I think John is right, too, that we can only support so much.
And I believe that's where the comment earlier of incentives comes from, and where it has come from in the past. So, and I don't think that you'll find any disagreement, or a great deal of disagreement, from anybody that sits up here in the commission as far as this particular map and corridor that's up before us on the big screen is the prime example, the one that we should use as our focus and build from. I honestly think that this is, but we can't drop everything around it, or you got to recreate the wheel, and we've already got the wheel assembled. So refine it. Let's make it all work together, and we can continue to refine every 5 to 10 years, whatever we need to. John, go ahead.
Mr. Chairman, did you say this is that what you just said, that this section of the South Virginia TOD is the primary focus? Is that
No,
what you-
it's all, but if something is going to grow and work,
Yeah.
this is probably the one that's already started on its own that we could, use as our model.
I think you're absolutely right. I agree with Claudia on this particular Todd this should be the one. And one of the things that nobody's brought up yet is if you look between the university and wherever you want, where there's been discussion about cutting it off at Moana or possibly at McCarran, what you have on the regional center side is the big employers. So you do have some intensity already in place north with the university, with downtown, and on the south with some gaming properties, convention center, and a mall. So it starts making some sense to start really pushing this TOD. So I think this is the prime one.
Thank you, John. Patrice?
Patrice Ecola, I just want to piggyback on that by saying that RTC is planning on pushing the BRT system up to UNR. So it will go all the way north to UNR.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
With this section of the Todd, Claudia, do you have notes and a comfort level of what the community feels is best for this? Is it the same concept? meeting a percentage, or is it meeting all? Do we modify any of the numbers and say meet them all? Are you comfortable with the input?
I'll review the standards for this area. I think minimal modification in this area. I have a number of letters which I have forwarded to you from realtors and developers in this area in particular, mostly north of Plum, who love it just the way it is. And we've had a lot of little infill projects where people can go in and they can get that extra unit on that property. They can have the reduction in parking. They can have a triplex with an office on the top or whatever it is. And a lot of these little projects have gone in and are coming in, and they seem to like it. So if we'd modified, I think it would be minimal in this area.
Okay, I have a question, because this was an area where a great deal of discussion last month occurred for parking. And the lack of parking, the businesses in the area would like to see something else provided for parking. Is a parking structure without other development attached to it allowed? Is that an acceptable use?
Sure.
So if somebody
Ken
owned...
can go build one right now for us.
Thank you, Ken. Appreciate the offer. I hope that came out on the tape.
Yeah, it's an allowed use.
So it's an allowed use by itself. If somebody owned 2 or 3 pieces of property, they wanted to level them, they could come in and build nothing but a pay-to-park parking structure on it.
Could actually just do a parking lot if they don't want to pay for the structure, because we have exempted open lot parking from the FAR requirement.
Okay.
And we did that a couple years
But
ago.
if somebody wanted to put a 2 or 3 story parking
Sure.
garage in that area, then that would be,
that's an allowed use.
in this corridor, would be an allowed
Yeah.
use and appropriate.
There are a lot of smaller surface, just vacant lots right now also, that they could just switch right now if somebody had that
Okay.
desire. The city doesn't own any.
Okay.
Right.
Commissioner Stapleton?
Thanks. I have 2 comments. I want to just go back real quick and address what John said. I really think that this discussion that we're having about the TODs is one of the most important discussions that we're probably going to have in a while on the Planning Commission, because these regulations are, across the city, and, this is big stuff that we're talking about. I think it's really important. And I just want to echo John's comment about that. I really think the way, and agree with looking at sort of long-term projections and the, how realistic it is, these existing, TODs in the areas that we have them now. And I kind of think almost that's how we should be starting this discussion. I don't know if we should even be, I think we should be looking at boundaries first. I think we should, talk about, projections for traffic and ridership and look at each area specifically. I know it would have to go all the way to regional planning, but I mean, I kind of think that, I think it's that important, I think that some of these areas aren't viable at all as TODs, and I think that we need to sort of have the courage to look at this on that level, to look at really, these goals that we all know we're talking about, walkability, and encouraging transit and all that. And sort of, I agree that this area really is an ideal of where this can be successful.
So you think this one is still viable? I thought you were going with that this one wasn't.
No.
Sorry.
I wanted to make that comment, and then I have a comment also about this specific one. I apologize. No, I'm sorry. I just wanted to make that comment in general, and I think that applies to some of the outlying TODs. This, I think, is the ideal of where, urban design in terms of walkability and density is really working and can work.
Okay.
I do have some specific comments about this one, but just in general, I just, I want to put that on the record that I think it's really important to maybe look at this from a little bit of a bigger picture standpoint.
And if you
look
have
at
specific ones on this, specific comments, I would love to hear it right now, if you have them.
Okay, I'll wrap up then on my big picture comment. I think you get where I'm going with that. So in conclusion, I think we should be doing this a little bit differently. I think we should be looking at the boundaries and the ridership and long-term projections, and I don't think we should be just tweaking little things here. So specifically in terms of this, Todd, I agree that there's just minor changes. Well, actually, there is one change that is not so minor. I really think that, and for folks who've been in this neighborhood, if you, say for example, have been behind the area where Soup and Craft, sort of the whole area from, yeah, down there, down from like California to Plum on the, well, both the east and west side of the streets, that what's happening along the Virginia, all the commercial stuff is really great. However, the boundaries of the Todd actually extend, you know, pretty deep into that residential area. And so what, you know, those regulations that are in place don't really promote or encourage keeping any of the existing sort of landscape there. I mean, there's a lot, the majority of that neighborhood, you get even pretty much one block off Virginia, and it's all residential. It's all, you know, historic bungalows and cute little homes. In my opinion, I don't think any of that should be inside the Todd because, you know, the development that's allowed is currently under the Todd regulations is much more dense, and it really encourages, you know, clearing out those homes and building, you know, commercial, higher density stuff, which is fine if that's what we want. However, I think that the character of that neighborhood is really sort of special. That's what a lot of people really like about that area. And so I think that, you know, if the boundary was moved closer back to Virginia, you would preserve, you know, that residential character, because as is, you know, when the market comes back, that most likely will not be preserved, you know, and you'll see some of those houses coming down because it pencils to build higher density development that isn't really going to be compatible back there. I'm thinking about, you know, Forest Street, all those blocks in there. So that's my comment on that. I think that's an important thing.
It is, and we are actually addressing that one also through the Midtown plan process and meeting with the property owners in that area. Jody Royal Goodwin is leading that up, and we are carving that area out as the residential portion of the Midtown district, and we're going to bring forward the idea of lowering the density in that area.
Okay.
And so still allowing that mixed use, because there are a lot of little offices mixed in there still, so still allowing the mixed use, but not allowing the density potentially.
Right, that's what I'm talking about, thanks.
And that's the area that you have you just highlighted, Claudia?
Yes, my right
Close
bound,
to,
my
but-
east boundary is a little fuzzy, because I can't remember what street it's on, but,
Okay.
but basically that area.
But basically that area. So the existing professional offices in there will remain and
Yeah.
not removing those, okay. Ken, go ahead.
Ken Crater, I agree 100% with that, and that goes right back to what John was talking about, that we've got too much Todd anyway. So let's encourage the development in those undeveloped areas and the areas that truly need redevelopment, and not in the cool little historic areas like this. So.
Okay. Anybody else in this area?
Mr. Chairman?
Yeah,
Commissioner Kaufman?
Claudia, you made the comment that in this particular Todd, minimal change, but I think the two things that I look at, even in this area, and the number one thing that comes before us is FARs, okay? And then the other thing is building facings. You know, again, I think it has, and I think they made a good point, some of the planners, that how that depends upon what's going in there depends upon how that building facing is. So, you know, and that comes along with Melissa made, you know, unloading a truck, you know, in the front or the side of a building. And sometimes that's a logistical nightmare in some of those existing Todds that, in David's Bridal, you know, all those, you know, they unload right in the front, and it's an issue when you drive through those lots. So I guess that's where I think they should be under the same, you know, have the same flexibility, I guess, as, you know, the north or the south Todd, you know, south part of that Todd. I don't see any difference in those.
You don't see a difference from the northern portion to the southern portion?
Well, I don't see the restrictions, the difference in the FARs and how buildings are going to face depending upon who is going to plan or develop that. You know, I think, again, that needs to be whoever that builder's going to be, they need to make that decision. You know, what's going to fit best. And in all honesty, with all the Todds, I'd like to do away with the FARs, personally.
And if you make that a motion, I'll second it right now, because I've said that for years.
Okay,
But
I'll
every
turn this
time
over
we
to
get to do a
Sienna.
variance, every
turn it
time
over to
it
you.
comes in, there's a variance on the FARs, and they're never met. But on this, well, okay, I'll wait, Claudia. On this, the north section of the South Virginia Todd, we have the Midtown plan that's going into place. It's going to address the residential. Now, between Moana and Domani, is that the Coliseum plan?
Between
Or the whatever the
between
convention center plan?
Moana and Del Monte is the convention
Convention
regional
center
center.
plan. Okay. Standards are different?
Similar,
Well, we had shaking heads, yes.
same base zoning. So your section before you 1808-301. So it's the same.
So right now,
Same base with some modifications for
is
the
it or
regional
is
center.
it not part of the Todd, though?
It's part of a regional center.
So it's a regional, so it's not, okay. So it wouldn't make sense in this case, and the way I'm looking at it, that you've got a center plan just to the south, then you've got the south portion of the Todd. We're looking at the menu, 3 of 7 items or 2 of 6 items or whatever it is on the south portion and doing away with the floor area ratios. I think Doug hit it right on the head. The floor area ratios are the biggest problem in the building articulations. Nobody wants the back of the buildings on the main street to have you come in and park.
Okay, and
No,
if I.
I don't think
sorry.
any developer does. I know every letter we've had, the police department says, we don't want to drive into that development. It takes more time and it costs more money to do it. The fire department says some of them, you got to open up driveways. The fire trucks don't fit in the drive patterns. It makes no sense to do that. I mean, rather than continue that and make that part of a menu item, I'd like to see that go away completely. Just my opinion.
And going back to the FAR, 2 of you now have stated to eliminate the FAR. And feel free to jump in here, any of the planners. If you get rid of the FAR and all the Todds, I would say get rid of the Todds. Without the density, you don't have a Todd. You have to have the density, or it just won't work.
Why can't there be a maximum as opposed to a minimum?
That's standard zoning. And feel free to
If I can
disagree
jump
with
in.
you. If you don't have density, you
Ken Crater.
won't have the support.
I agree, we need density, but rather than a floor area ratio, why can't we just say a minimum density of 14 dwelling units per acre? At least in those areas outside the ring road, and maybe go up to 18 or something inside the loop. To me, that's more workable than just requiring an FAR.
Ken, could you clarify, because that's in the context of residential, but we're saying commercial, right? So
Yeah.
if commercial's legitimate for the TOD, then you got to define it with FAR.
Exactly, and for a floor area ratio for commercial, that's really dependent on whether or not you've got pads and drive-throughs, because I can tell you that it's really difficult to get a floor area ratio of greater than 20% on a modern commercial center when you have a couple pads, your landscaping requirements, your parking requirements. So the 0.25, which is kind of a standard, that's almost impossible to meet these days unless you put in nothing but big boxes and get rid of all the nice little local mom and pop shops that make centers desirable for a lot of people that shop. So if you're going to have FARs, then maybe you need to lower them to something more reasonable.
I have a comment
What
on
kind of a
that.
number would that be?
And just for the record, it's 0.5 here right now in the northern just in the northern portion, it's 0.5.
Well, just on a bigger scale aren't we looking for the residential density? Because that's going to drive the commercial, so isn't the residential density more important? And why are we worrying about the commercial FAR? Because that's the one that's hard to meet. And like Ken says, we need the density to get the ridership to get the commercial. So why worry about the commercial FAR?
Commissioner Kaufman, but Ken said it before. You know, normally what happens is the commercial comes in first, and then, you know, that's part of the residential that comes afterwards. So, am I correct, or?
I don't know if
Ken?
that, in this section, I wouldn't agree with that.
Melissa?
I think it's all here already in this section.
Mike Rayleigh.
If I can just jump in, I think it's, I understand both sides, but I think if you don't have the FAR, like Claudia says, there's no point in having a TOD, because you have to have the density in order for the TOD to work. So if you take away one of the key standards to bring in the density, the TOD will fail. It will never work, in my opinion. But I sympathize that, you know, I've been before you many, many times because you can't meet those FARs. This area is a little bit different because you only really have the one, you know, you look at those two parcels on the map. One is the Pepper Mill. That's not going to change. The other is Parkland Mall. But the other parcels, for the most part, are small little parcels where you're going to want, you know, you're building fronting on Virginia Street. You're going to want the foot traffic coming in the front door being on Virginia Street, where you're not going to have these sea of parking in front of your building. You know, I heard drive-throughs mentioned. I don't think you should have drive-throughs as a permitted use in the TOD corridor. You don't want, that's just encouraging people to drive and not use transit. So, I mean, I think this one is somewhat unique in that case where I would agree that it wouldn't work further south where you've got basically a freeway. Virginia Street becomes, you know, the width of a freeway, and just the existing development patterns. But here you've already got a fairly intense core to begin with. I think it makes sense to maintain that.
Ken, go ahead.
The issue I have with what Mike just said, though, is that if you're going to do retail, it just does not pencil in this Reno market to do uses up above, whether it be office or residential. So it's fine if you're renovating an existing building, but if you expect new construction in the next many years to have two-story buildings, unless it's all residential, it just doesn't work in today's market. So that 0.5 floor area ratio, there's still a couple vacant pieces of property, one which we're looking at, and the only way that's going to get developed and get rid of the mess that it is right now is if you can have a realistic floor area ratio. And I can't even make a 0.25 work on the site because it's not a square site. It's an oddball shape. And so at least you need to have some flexibility where if you're going to have that floor area ratio, that you have a process the developer can come in with what would be a great project and work to convince staff and the planning commission that, all right, I don't meet the FAR, but hey, it's a good project. It's going to redevelop the site, bring in people, tax revenue, and encourage further redevelopment once it's done.
Mike? Oh, sorry, Angela, we'll come to you next.
And I'm not disagreeing with Ken. I think he's probably right, but I think there is a process for that. There's a special use permit process for that now, and I know you're sick of hearing special use permits for FARs, but I think if you actually broke down where most of those special use permits were, they're not in this area. But I think that, you know, there is a process to do that, and that's why that's there.
Angela?
I think we need to go back to Commissioner Stapleton's comments about what is the vision of the TOD, and the vision is to have density. So I support an FAR in this area, and again, put in the flexibility. If you can't meet it, like Ken is saying, right now you can't meet the FAR for a non-residential project. That's fine. You have the flexibility that we talked about to say, I can't meet the FAR, but I can do these other 3 items. So we're meeting the intent, again. It still gives us the TOD, but it gives Ken the flexibility to come forward with his project, and maybe in 10 or 15 years, he can meet the FAR on a site that he can't meet on now.
Okay. You know, I can't say that I don't. I mean, I see both sides, and I see it both from sitting here as a planning commissioner, and then I see it from a construction development side. And I look at most of your projects when they come before us with the same mindset. But I can't see getting rid of the FAR. And Angela, I agree with you 100%. Okay, if you can't make the FAR, but then what can you make, okay? And I think that's a fair trade-off, because in this particular corridor, not North Valley's, not the southernmost corridor, this makes sense in this existing area, because we look at infill, we look at remodels. To me, it makes sense to have the FAR. That's just my opinion. Commissioner Stapleton?
Yeah, I'll second that. And just, if we are looking at this as sort of our ideal of what, a successful TOD would look like, and Ken was talking about in terms of FAR for commercial, having, commercial uses on the second story too. There is some of that existing in this corridor, and I think that's sort of the idea in a dense, mixed-use, commercial, urban area. You're not going to have a bar or a grocery store on the second floor, but you're going to have offices, you're going to have, and there are examples of that in this corridor, and in other cities, in more dense urban areas, that is exactly what exists. You've got you've got commercial uses that don't have high, street traffic coming in up on the second stories, and then you've got you've got office space. You guys know what I'm trying to say. You have all the stuff where you need the street traffic on the first floor, and then you've got all kinds of other commercial uses on the second.
Claudia?
Or third or fourth in
Okay.
other cities.
Claudia, do you have a new understanding of where we are in this corridor, or do we need to
Sure.
discuss it some more?
No, we don't need to discuss this anymore.
Because I know we'll discuss it one more time, maybe next month, huh?
Okay, the next one. Mill Street Todd. Where's my label? So this area to the west, where's my pen? So over in this area over here is the Medical Regional Center. So all of this is MU over here as well. Starts at Kitsky. It's really just the southern portion of Mill, so between Mill and Market. So from Kitsky to the freeway. The one little section that is still in the city. Need to check the ownership on that one. That might actually have changed since this was done. And then a little bit past the freeway on Mill, and then down Terminal. The reasoning for this was to link downtown and medical regional centers to the airport regional center. And again, gaming does need to be located within the mixed-use zoning district, and that is obviously a large gaming facility. I'll open this one up to discussion.
Okay, I'll start it. This is one that I think that an adjustment to the border, the parameters should be dealt with rather than going after standards. And that's everything south of Mill Street should be removed. Everything north, because it's gaming, to remain.
So just keeping the gaming? Because everything else is south of Mill.
Yes, because why would, I cannot see mixed use being used in an industrial area, in a manufacturing area, an area with auto dealerships and motorcycle dealerships, which is what and repair shops, that's what we have in this area. It's a great area for it. That's my
Another
opinion.
concept or an idea that came out on this one was to, other than the gaming piece, was to have it the same as the concept we're using in the airport regional center, where you can have your choice. You can either do the MU, you can do IC. But if you do IC, you do all IC. If you do MU, you do all MU. And we could bring in the options that have been brought forward on the other issues. So you can either go all IC or you can do MU with the options, the 3 out of 7 or whatever it ends up being.
Mr. Chairman, I have a question for Claudia. Is there any mixed use in here at all right now?
I don't
think
like
there is.
like on a mix of uses on one parcel.
Yeah, any of this, Todd, is there any residential?
There is some residential, I'm trying to, oh, you know, it might be on the other side of Kitski. There's the apartments here. Angela, you know this area.
Yeah, I'm trying to think. I think there's maybe,
I wanna say there
I
is
know
a-
there's one vacant parcel, and it does not front Terminal. It's kind of weird. It's between Matley and Terminal.
here.
But there's a parcel in front of it that's actually on
The-
Terminal.
That's it's the third one, the one just below that one.
And other than that, I don't know that there's any vacant property to even in the future develop, and I think most of it's developed as industrial.
I think there's one or two on Mill.
Maybe some offices,
There's a
but
couple little
You have
vacant
a
ones on
corner
Mill.
of Matley and Mill, and then you
Yeah.
have, Angela, the lot that you just pointed out.
right.
And I don't believe there is another one south on Terminal, about 3/4 of the way down. I believe looks like it's a vacant lot, but it's actually part of 7-Up bottling and in that area right there. It's actually part of an existing property.
But I did like Claudia's idea of giving them, the developer or the property owner, the option. You could do mixed use or you can do industrial. I think that gives us, again, the intent to meet TOD, or if you want to do industrial, you have the option.
And I like that idea a lot better since I made my opening statement.
It's all right.
You know, that's okay. But this is a commercial area, and when it was originally discussed, and I was sitting on a nab at the time, you know, the discussion was auto repair shop down below and maybe housing apartments up above, and I'm thinking, oh, yeah, what a great place to have a house over the top of an auto repair shop or a machine shop. And so I like the suggestion a lot better. Mike?
You know, I think this one, and John, interrupt me if I'm not speaking to what you said, but I think this is one that kind of falls into John's category where we've got too much. I mean, if you look at the population forecast for this area, there is no real existing residential density. It would all be to the west of Kitski, and that's at a much lower density than the stuff that we just looked at on North Virginia Street. And I don't see it transitioning. You do have a big employment center, obviously, with Grand Sierra, and I understand the concept of linking it to the airport, but I don't think the population's ever going to be there to warrant the mixed use.
I agree. It's business population. It's not residential population. Never will, never should be.
And it's so small that you're not going to get much there. I would suggest that we keep the stand, because we have specific standards that go with that gaming site, and I would like to see those stay in place. We develop those with the owner.
And can you expand on that?
Building orientation, and it spells out how they would expand, because right now they're in all the structures in the middle. It has it developing closer to Mill Street, maintains access to the river, because actually they have fantastic ability to have access to the river, but it's not really used.
Who does?
Grand Sierra.
Oh, okay. Okay, yes.
So I think if something's going to get redeveloped, and they have had housing concepts, I don't think it's the current owner, but somebody along the line has had the idea of putting in housing along the river back there. So this is one of those elements where we would like to connect it to the recreation ability, the ability to have recreation element. And there has been discussions on having residential, mixed-use, commercial office
Well, then
and
doesn't
access
that
to
make
the river.
even more sense to pull everything out south of Mill Street? Then your existing standards work for the gaming property?
Right. I think I'm saying the same thing, in that we
Okay.
have those standards, and we have separate standards for the gaming portion.
Yes.
And how, if that develops, because it's really it's a huge area that could be redeveloped. And if this, I would like to say, when this gets redeveloped, this could all change in here. So to have that option, do I see now, but if all of a sudden you've got, hundreds of residential units in here and some support commercial, the marketability of these parcels might change at that point.
Okay.
Hey, Claudia, I have a question. Why don't you just do what Commissioner Weisky said and just turn it from a Todd to a regional center with just the Grand Sierra property?
A regional center typically has more than one thing going for it.
Big thing, though.
It's just a casino right now.
But it's a big property, I mean.
It is a big property, but it's just the one element right now. I would say if it could develop into a regional center. I don't think it's got all of the elements that a regional center needs at this time. If that residential comes in and the commercial comes in, yes, I could see supporting that. But right now, it just, having one use doesn't make a regional center. If Sienna agrees with that.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Sienna Reed. In terms of a regional center, what you look for is a combination of places that are unique to the region. So things that you can't really find in combination other places. So for example, the university or our TMCC campus or the Convention Regional Center that also has the Meadowood Shopping Mall in close proximity. So really things that you can't duplicate elsewhere. And there's been lots of conversations about unrestricted gaming, and the conversations in the past have primarily focused around we have unrestricted gaming in a lot of places. It's not really unique all on its own. So the combination of other things is important, as Claudia was mentioning.
Okay. Any other input on this one?
So what are we doing with it? Claudia?
I didn't hear
IC.
any IC. You could have your choice of IC or MU in the brown portions, and then the gaming area would say the same. The large
Work?
RLM, I should say.
All right, sounds
General
good to me.
consensus is good.
Good.
Okay.
Okay.
Sounds good.
East 4th Street, Todd. Bound by the freeway to the north, the river to the south, Sparks to the east, and the downtown regional center to the west, and also some of the medical regional center to the southwest. So it's really kind of, it has nowhere to go. It's really what's left after all those other elements are looked in. Also, this was the area some of you may remember. I'm sure that most of the people on this side remember the Reno Sparks corridor district in this area. We had an SPD here. First it was a neighborhood plan, then it was an SPD. And when we developed this Todd corridor, that business association in that area was very, very attached to that handbook. And we essentially just took it and sort of transferred it into the form of MU. We didn't change much. This was the first area where we changed the zoning requirement to be the zoning standard shall be to the approval of the property owner. And this was the first place we put that in place in the city. And I think I actually don't really hear many parking issues in this area. I don't know if anybody has much familiarity with this neighborhood. Still some areas to be developed. I don't know if Patrice wants to address transit in this area.
Patrice Ecola. Currently, we're doing a corridor study, and this is part of the corridor study that we're looking at to enhance this for the historical elements that exist in this section here. As far as the proposed new transit locations, I'm not 100% sure that those are still on the table. So, but that can be a discussion when RTC comes back and gives a presentation.
Hey.
This is an area where I'm looking at a piece of property on Wells and 6th that, again, the developer can't make the standards work to front the property on the highest volume street, which is Wells Avenue. There's a huge retaining wall there, and there's no access, and so that's coming in for a special use permit right off the bat because of that, because of the building frontage standards.
Yeah, and I seem to remember when we were doing this, that there was a lot of discussion because there was heavy industry, automotive repairs, different businesses like that. And if I'm not mistaken, isn't there a stipulation or a clause somewhere that if the business stops doing that, that it can't reopen or something within so many months? And that generated a lot of discontent, I think, with some of the businesses there along 4th Street. That's, Doc's Radiator Shop and transmission shops and everything else. I some people aren't car people, but I happen to be, and you got to have those businesses somewhere. Historically, they've been there. I mean, I know Melissa wants to do a Mustang someday. She's going to need a place to do a radiator and a transmission and whatever. I don't think this makes sense as far as density anywhere past probably Sutro, but it's just my opinion. I don't see how you're going to get anything Todd-oriented in there.
Claudia, when this went to MU, a lot of this property was already zoned industrial or commercial, correct?
Correct.
And so they lose that status if a business, a current business, leaves the address for a period of 6 months or more. A like business cannot come in and assume that same zoning, correct?
I'm actually just looking at East 4th Street. Actually, we kept most, if not all, of the industrial uses in the East 4th Street.
Then why do we have it all
Todd.
blue
So
on
it's
this
still in the
map?
Todd. It's in the Todd. But in the land use table, we allowed the industrial uses to remain. So you can still do heavy machinery equipment, indoor manufacturing, maintenance and repair, outdoor storage, salvage and reclamation. I mean, it's pretty industrial over in that area, and still is allowed to be.
As long as what's developed is developed MU, correct, or not?
No.
No.
No,
Okay.
it's all still allowed. No, I can't say all, because I can't flip back and forth between them, but just looking at it, the main industrial uses are still allowed. Let me get to the auto repair.
So Melissa, then, looking at the example that you were just discussing, a person wants to come in and develop a piece of property or use a piece of property. What is not working with the standards the way they are right now?
Well, you'd still have to meet the MU standards, which is put the building on the street. So whether it's an industrial building or a radiator shop that you got to put on the property line and have the parking in the back or whatever. In my case, it's a retail store where you have to put, the same thing, where you don't have the visibility, you don't have the parking, you're hiding the parking in the back in an area that maybe there's more concern for higher visibility. So it's the same problem. So that's where the menu of flexibility would be good to be able to.
One area that came up in a discussion we were having over at RTC yesterday was the area east of 395. So over in this area here. And Patrice, jump in if you disagree, but I would say the main ideas that came out of that was to maintain the Todd along 4th, not necessarily into the industrial areas that butt up against the freeway, as a general statement, to allow those industrial uses to maintain and grow in those other areas.
Correctly, this is Patrice again. And the other thing that we were discussing yesterday is that RTC is looking at from Sutro, 6th and Sutro, our existing RTC facility over there, going north to 80, and then moving west and purchasing the property right in that general location for our new hybrid buses and storage and maintenance. So I don't know if that's allowed in the Todd.
Mr. Chair?
Go ahead, Commissioner Stable.
Yeah, I just want to chime in on the discussion on 4th Street. And I agree with Commissioner Romeo about a lot of those automotive and existing uses. And I think it sounds like that those would still be allowed, but I think that really adds to the character of that neighborhood. Historically, some of those uses are what have made, it's sort of like, well, I don't know how to describe it, but it has a certain feel and character to it that people seem to really like, and some of those industrial uses are a part of that. I think, actually, that this Todd, and probably not all the way east, but especially closer to Wells, is one of the more appropriate ones. just because I think that this is, you know, it was built during the time when most people didn't drive, so it is a little bit more walkable by nature. And I think that there is some mixed use sort of happening over there, as well as a lot of, you know, restaurants, well, not a lot, a couple restaurants, entertainment things happening. And I actually think this is one of the areas where a Todd is a little bit more realistic. I mean, there's a whole lot more discussion around that, but just that's my sense of this neighborhood. However, I definitely agree with Commissioner Romeo about that, you know, as all neighborhoods are different, this is different, and some of those industrial uses, you know, the part of the character of this neighborhood includes those industrial uses, and I think that that's important. And then I understand what Melissa's saying too. I know that parcel, and that, I don't know if that's sort of an outlier, you know, but I think sort of the area that I'm talking about that seems more amenable to the Todd is, you know, down to, say, gosh, I don't want to say, but, you know, it's the area closer to downtown, and as you get further east, I think it becomes less appropriate.
Okay, so what we were saying there, over like east of 395 there.
Yeah, definitely east of 395,
yeah.
maybe even, you know. Oh, maybe, yeah, I think 395. I'm trying to think about it in my head.
And I don't know if Andy has these numbers, but there's a lot of pedestrians in this area. There's a lot of pedestrians in this area. And cyclists, a lot of cyclists as well. So something to keep in mind. You know, we already have the pedestrians here.
I guess, Mr. Chairman, I have a question related to a comment and in my previous life discussions of people, you know, if you have a business in this area, say on the 4th Street, and it's where Commissioner Romeo gets his oil changed, and that place happens to change hands, and then it wants to become a tire place, and it's not exactly the same type of, I guess that's not a good example, but maybe it wanted to become a restaurant.
How about making widgets instead of oil changes?
It wanted to change what its function is. Is that allowed, and how much of a concern is that in the future, speaking to, you know, potentially that would be any changes that might be in that area?
Something like that, auto repair to restaurant, I think was your example, that would be allowed, and you could go restaurant to automobile repair. They're both allowed uses. I think health department would probably be your bigger issue on that than zoning, but but yeah, they're both allowed uses. This is a fairly flexible Todd corridor as far as land uses go.
Okay.
And also, if you have, pretty sure it's everywhere, I think it's in the MU base zone. If you have a use that was existing prior to MU, and it was made non-conforming by MU, you can double that in size without a special use permit. So just say you have auto repair, and it was I before, now it's switched to MU and auto repair isn't allowed, you can still double that in size from when it came into MU. So we allow those existing uses to remain and to double in size without a special use permit. But then, answering your question, if both uses are allowed, they can switch back and forth as much as they want.
Melissa, go ahead.
Melissa Lindell. Again, I've got a developer that wants to come in and reinvest in this area, and they can't meet the FAR, and they're going to come in for the same building orientation problem, and that's just what's going to happen unless we start getting some
we know the problem. What's the solution?
To have a list of other things that you can do. You can have more intense building architecture. You can have bigger landscape area, bigger sidewalks or decorative sidewalks or better pedestrian amenities or some other options, so you just don't have to go through these variations and variances versus special use permits.
Okay, that makes sense.
Commissioner
Romeo?
And I think that makes sense in everything we're going to talk about, quite frankly.
It might very well.
I mean,
it's a common theme, and you know, I mean, when we get down to correcting what the problems are and massaging them and making them feel better, that might be the one that works. I mean, it's a very common theme we keep hearing from
Can
section to section.
Can I ask Melissa, is that under the bridge, is that wide? You mentioned that it had a 30-foot wall or something. Is that under the bridge where you don't even?
Right, the overpass.
So you don't even have
on the
access
wall.
off
You don't
wells,
have
you have to
access
come
on
down?
wells, and you're supposed to orient the building to the highest street with the most traffic, which would be Wells.
Be Wells Avenue. Okay.
So we couldn't do that just
So
automatically.
you would back up to the only place that you could see to have people looking down to do business? Okay.
But I
And
think
that-
the
that
bottom
makes
line
no
here is
sense.
we've got to encourage people to invest in the community. When people want to come in and develop, how can we encourage rather than discourage?
Okay, thanks.
So it's
You
really
you guys are throwing out great ideas, and I compliment you for that. I mean, that's what's going to happen, ultimately. Go ahead, Commissioner.
I mean, I think, everybody's just looking for it, and, you just basically said it. It's that ability to have the flexibility, that, we're not always gonna be able to get that square peg in the round hole. And if there's the opportunities, and I don't know if the special use permit is always, has to be the only solution, or if there's other alternatives. We're certainly open to suggestions on that. That maybe there's a different level of standards.
Thanks, Chair Weske. Yeah, completely agreed. A good example of this, I agree, is definitely a transit-oriented corridor. But the pedestrian use, the transit, to me, is different than how we would treat downtown, midtown area. And even though we want to consider them both TODs, I want to treat them completely different. And I think that this is what we're going for. And I would even, in some cases, want to enhance the flexibility in the area. And I think that's what we're all discussing, but definitely support that.
Ken?
I was the one that originally suggested the SPD to this neighborhood and sat up making a presentation in the top floor of the old Holiday Inn to a room with not a single seat left. And
I was at that meeting. I
Were you
remember
at that
I
meeting?
was at that meeting.
And I can tell you the biggest issue this neighborhood had, other than making sure their uses were grandfathered, is uses that they don't want. We all know how thrilled they were with the homeless center on Record Street, but I don't know which, or if any of these things are in there, but I brought this up in the last workshop. Things like tattoo parlors, blood plasma donor centers. I think, again, we need to look carefully, not just the uses that are allowed, but maybe some that aren't appropriate and further discourage redevelopment of these areas.
And what we have to be careful of is encroaching on First Amendment rights when we start to discuss some of those issues. So, but the concept is good. Being specific leads to a whole nother issue, and I see Rob's finally awake over there. But yes, that's what we have to be careful of. So it's not a bad discussion, but it's one that we have to, be fair on.
Okay, I think
Okay.
I have some good direction on this one,
Good.
unless anyone else has anything else.
Tell you what I think is a great idea since it's 8 o'clock. Why don't we all take a 10-minute break so we can get up and walk around? And then we will hit the last couple of maps that we have and discuss those.
Okay.
So we
I'll
will
second that.
re-adjourn at 8:10. Thank you, Commissioner Kaufman.
We're just getting the good ones. These are the ones where I take my red pen.
Let's re-adjourn, get back into this so we can be done. Go ahead, Claudia, you're next.
Okay, I'm on the north section of the North Virginia Todd. Melissa, what left? This is Melissa's favorite section.
Yes.
I'm fine with this coming out completely.
Good.
I'm just going to cut to the chase.
If we
I was
were-
just going to say that.
If we were going to
We're good?
have a motion tonight, I'm sure it would be seconded and voted
Okay,
on
anybody?
already. So
Anybody going once?
Well, I
So-
want to hear that again.
Hold on.
I just
All
want
right,
to hear it.
southern portion.
it's on tape, so we've got her.
Let's do it.
I just have one question on that, Claudia. Are you going to go back to the previous zoning then,
Yes,
or?
I would propose to go back to the previous zoning. And there's actually some parcels, there's some people who want to come out of the city on that, which is another issue that I'm working with Sienna and Kim on, but there's a portion of this area that we're looking at rolling back the sphere, and I think some of it's already in the city, so we would be looking at de-annexing a portion of it also.
Okay, great. Next map.
But that's a whole nother discussion. Southern portion of the North Virginia Todd. I'm not really sold on any of this either. To get rid of the entire North Virginia Todd, we would have to do a regional plan amendment.
Okay, go ahead.
We
You want to vote on that one?
yours.
And the problem is,
I don't quite have a quorum.
There,
No, I take that back on this one.
it's not agendized.
Is there a particular property that we would be looking at for that, you know, in the other areas, there are certain properties that would make it out of conformance where we have to change the regional? So why would you?
To eliminate the North Virginia Todd altogether, we would have to amend the regional plan. We can, I don't think we can skinny it anymore. It's already pretty skinny. But we could shorten it. We can make it very small. There is some multifamily kind of in this area in here that might still work. We
Claudia,
have
can I
the-
ask Mr. Chair, can I ask a question?
Absolutely, Mike, you're speaking. Go ahead.
Can you just, because I don't know this exactly, can you just go over what changes we can make without having to go to regional, and what changes are and what parts of this are in the regional plan?
We can, and Sienna, feel free to
Just
jump
for
in.
the Todds in general.
We can amend the boundaries of the Todd. So whether we're adding something in or taking it out, we can amend that as a master plan amendment. We bring that forward to regional under conformance review, and then they amend the regional plan to reflect that. We don't have to do a regional plan amendment if we're changing the boundaries. If we're eliminating it completely, or if we are adding a new one, then we would need to do a regional plan amendment.
And what about the specific standards?
Standards are not in the regional
They're
plan.
all
There's
in just
the only
Reno.
thing, there's the FAR and density requirements,
Sienna said that. Those are in the regional plan.
and that's in the regional plan. So, and those are, it says we have to provide for those. So there's different ways, I think, that we could provide for those.
So that would be an amendment or a conformance review?
If we still meet those, it would,
If we wanted to change or eliminate those, not that we do. If we wanted to change those.
if we still provide for those densities, then in my opinion, we would still be in conformance, and we would just go for conformance review if we're amending the master plan. If we are completely disregarding those, then we would need to do a regional plan amendment.
If I may add, in terms of thinking about a regional plan amendment to completely eliminate a Todd corridor, going back to the concept of Todd, of having regional centers connected by transit-oriented development corridors, something that the Regional Planning Commission may wish to consider, which is not a conversation, currently being had, but just something, to think about, is that you would be stranding the Stead Regional Center by itself.
Go ahead, John.
Comments on the south section of the north TOD. I would be in favor of removing it entirely for a couple of reasons. Again, planning principle based, not just, what we like and dislike. But I think one of the most major parcels just north of McCarran on the east side, a project where we did a master plan to the TOD 4, 5, 6 years ago. The two things that are really, I think, tough to work and still call this Todd is character. We come to character. You got to respect character when we're looking. And when you got 50-mile-per-hour speeds, very, very wide, intense, audio-oriented street, you're going to have a tough time creating the character you need. So there's just kind of planning principle. The other is the end of the intense employer, the university, is at McCarran. So that would be my thoughts on this one. Thank you.
Ken?
Ken Crater, and if I can add to that, we've all driven up this street, and the property is extremely steep on most portions of Virginia Street, up and down. So with that alone, it's almost impossible to meet most of the requirements within the Todd. So I would have no problem just eliminating this entirely, even if it does mean a regional plan amendment. And furthermore, I'd like to add the fact that it doesn't just take a Todd to encourage density. If you look at the large number of apartment buildings that have been built on here, most of those were constructed before the Todd even came into existence. Again, it was the developer looking to make the highest and best use of his piece of property, and given the proximity of this area to the university, it made sense for those people to develop multifamily properties to serve the students.
Okay, I think we're all in agreement with that one also. Claudia, good X, nice.
Wish I had a red one. Okay, this is West 4th Street. This is Keystone. McCarran is right here. This is the industrial park where Patagonia is. And then out to the Mogul on-ramp, the River Inn, I think is what it's called, out there, out to that area. That's right. Ideas we've tossed around the office is to bring this back to McCarran. So remove this portion here.
That's my first instinct, but
I'm sorry?
I said that's my first instinct too.
We've had some discussion with different people with some interest in further intensifying within McCarran Ring. I don't know, Mike, you could probably speak to Monte Vista Village.
Why wouldn't
if
you
know
bring it back
anything.
to Stoker? Because everything beyond Stoker is railroad property, pretty much railroad property, or
Not on the
cut
north side.
slopes.
There's two developers on the north side, near Johnny's, not to be specific, but kind of
Okay.
in that area that are,
where the restaurants are.
yeah, who like being in the Todd.
I also know that there's, another property owner in that general vicinity that we're working with that is favorable to the Todd standards for the project he wants.
But what would prevent them from building to the Todd standards, even if the Todd doesn't exist?
I would have to look, potentially it could be, if it reverted back to, say, like AC or something like that, we might be able to make densities work, but I haven't looked at it that closely, to be honest with you. But I think there is some appetite from certain property owners in there, enough property owners that it might make sense to keep.
Okay, and I don't have,
Yeah.
I don't have opinion, I'm just asking the questions for discussion, for information. Ken, go
Which-
ahead.
I own a piece of property on Summit Ridge Drive, just north of McCarran. And when we first bought the property, I went and met down with the city, and I can't remember which planner I talked to because the Todd was under discussion. And I just remember her telling me distinctly, don't worry, your property's not coming into the Todd. So we got our property rezoned to allow for a townhouse project. Then they brought it into the Todd anyway, and now we've revised our plans, which fit really nicely with the Todd. So I would have no problem keeping McCarran Boulevard as a boundary and not have to go through a whole nother planning phase on my property. But I also like to add the fact that I think Virginia Street and 4th Street are truly the two north-south, east-west corridors, other than the freeway, that we need to plan for the future for intense development along those corridors. They're both important routes. They used to be the freeway access into town. And if we were, say, to pull out the area west of McCarran Boulevard, then I think we ought to do like Claudia said on South Virginia Street and at least keep the same master plan designation to allow and encourage that development in the future.
If we cut it off at McCarran, would we have the same menu of options here to meet? Are we going to try to at least standardize that portion of it
Oh,
first?
sure, no, I think we could do the options.
Huh?
I think we could do the options in this area also.
Okay, so 3 of 6 or whatever
Whatever
it
it ends
turns
up
out to
being,
be. Okay.
6 or 7.
No.
Just kidding, just kidding. I was just seeing who's awake. Easy
Well,
does
my-
it. Sorry, it's getting late.
Well, my initial thought was Keystone, but I can live with McCarran on the west because that is kind of the ring. That is a defining area there, so as long as the options are there.
John?
you recall a couple of us commented on this at the last workshop. Andy Durlin and I both talked about Keystone, but there's been a few good, I still think Keystone would be, or McCarran. McCarran makes some sense because that is, right, the big, the ring road, as we've talked about, so.
Keystone would be an elimination, because that's where it starts.
It'd be what?
It starts at Keystone, so
Yeah.
that would be eliminating it.
Okay.
Just to.
You know, try it, right?
Okay. Any other comments on this one? Okay, good.
This one, Sienna and I are working on this one, too. Can you zoom out just a bit?
It's got lots of colors. I can tell
Lots of
Sienna
colors.
was working on it.
And that's one of my goals, is to get it so all our maps match. Because they were all done on different versions of our GIS program, I think, since it took 12 years to do these. So this is very West 4th Street, the Gold Ranch area. We are looking at rolling back the sphere out here. So up in this area, we're looking at rolling back the sphere, and this area over here, rolling back the sphere. So that would no longer be in our jurisdiction if that goes through. Gold Ranch we've seen a variety of development plans for that area. I think that has a good chance of intensifying in the future. One option we could do would be to scale it back to the tourist commercial area, so the pink area there, and amend the Western Gateway Regional Center, which is the Boomtown Regional Center, or the regional center where Boomtown is, and amending that regional center to include this. I don't think there's anything in the regional plan that says they have to touch each other. So have two sections of the regional center. So we would keep Gold Ranch. So we would have Gold Ranch and, or Terribles, I think it is now, sorry, and Boomtown.
Okay, but we're not.
In the same regional center.
We're not doing anything with regional centers at this time, right?
Correct, but if we were to pull back out of this area, gaming needs to be located in a regional center or a transit corridor. So if we were to pull all the way back out of this area, we could keep the tourist commercial as tourist commercial, but include it into, it would just be adding an area into a regional center, not changing any standards within a regional center.
Okay. Comments?
Oh, I'm confused. Are we saying
Angela?
take this out of the TOD and put it into the regional center?
The tourist commercial portion, and then the rest of it would, well, a lot of the rest of it would be rolled out of the sphere.
So this would no longer be TOD at all?
Potentially, that was an idea that was thrown out
It seems it doesn't really fit with TOD. There's no transit out here. It's not really walkable. If the intent is to develop Gold Ranch as a TOD, I mean, are they thinking some kind of
See,
mixed
that's it.
use, or are they
Any-
thinking more like a commercial?
Any development I've seen there has been more of a regional center concept.
But no transit, not really walkable.
I would say potentially no transit.
Yeah.
If it develops well enough, there could be a park and ride. There could be if it's a larger employer, I'm trying to speak very generally here, if it becomes a
Yeah.
larger employer, they could do some sort of shuttle or smaller bus service. And then there's also the Mortensen Garson area that's going to be providing a lot of housing out there
Yeah.
in the next 10, 20, 30 years. So we need to plan for that. So to allow for services out there, so everybody who lives there doesn't have to come all the way into town.
Right.
To get the services.
Okay.
To still allow that option for intensification here and in the Boomtown area.
Right.
Okay, I think you've got general consensus up here. I don't know what general consensus from
Good?
planners in the community?
Okay.
Yep. That's on record too, Claudia. Okay,
Yep, I'm good.
I believe that's the ends of your maps.
That is the end of my maps. I have attached all the standards. I think at this time, we probably shouldn't be going through all the standards because these are going to change drastically when I redo the maps. So I would say, give me some time to make these changes, and then I'll bring it back to you.
Okay. Do you think we will be looking at a special meeting for June to discuss this?
No.
We'll do it right after our regular, will you be ready for our regular planning commission meeting for
I would say no to the June
next
part.
workshop? What's that?
I would say no to the June part,
Yeah, I know, that's what I was asking.
the next
Which-
one. Maybe July,
July?
this summer, summer 2012, let's go with that.
It's not a billboard issue, okay? Should we set a time up for July then?
I'm thinking the first meeting in July is probably not a good idea. We could do that third Wednesday, again, like this one is.
Third Wednesday of July?
We can look at that.
Okay, that's the
Tentatively.
18th, 19th? Okay,
I don't have my book with me.
somebody have
It's
a
up there.
calendar on them? Ken, you got a calendar?
Rob?
18th is a Wednesday, so July 18th
Okay.
at 6 o'clock, we will schedule the next workshop meeting. And staff will have revisions out for us and standards and maps and all kinds of fun stuff.
Transit data.
Transit data, yes. And actually, I'm going to meet with Patrice. That might even be at an earlier meeting.
Wonderful, thanks.
Yeah.
I'm sorry, I didn't,
The presentation on transit from RTC.
oh, okay.
Sorry, I was just chiming in for transit data, so we can actually look at how much,
Well,
ridership
we can
there
do
is and
that
stuff
at
like
one of
that.
our regular meetings. Okay. Any other input, discussion, comments? Melissa?
Melissa Lindell, could we also talk about or look into the fact that in these requirements, you have to have variances for some of them and special use permits for others? And it makes it kind of awkward because you have to apply for both.
Well, I think with the option concept coming forward, that'll all be
That'll
eliminated.
go away? Oh,
Yep.
good. Great.
Yep. So
Just to make
it's
sure, would
three.
you offer a specific example to Claudia? You can
Okay.
send her an
Oh,
email.
I know what she's
She
talking about.
probably
Oh, you know
knows
it,
what I'm
okay.
talking about.
Yeah.
Okay.
We've had that
Be
conversation
easier if
many
it was all
times.
special use permits.
Yeah, I
Ken?
think
If
it's
they
all
all go
gonna,
away,
I think it's all good. I think all
Ken?
of that will be
that
resolved.
would be good. Thank you.
Ken Crater, I was talking to Patrice before she left, and she made the comment to me that RTC also has issues with buildings right along the street when they have transit in terms of difficulties for bus ridership. So I just wanted to bring that up.
Okay. Thank you. Appreciate that.
I just have-
Commissioner Romeo?
But when we get our hands wrapped all around this, are we going to have a process for streamlining? So when people come in, they'll know exactly who, what, when, and where. So I'd like to see this with a menu type selection process so they don't have to do a special use permit or a variance or something on top of the application for the
Right, that's what
for
we were
the
just talking
permitting.
about. That's what this is, that's what this will
Well,
achieve.
can we have some kind of an idea what that's going to look like, what the selection process is going to be? Or is it too early for that?
You mean right now?
No.
Oh. Wow, you're good. I'm not sure I'm that good.
I'm not an ogre here. I'm just saying, when we talk about this next time, I'd like to kind of have an idea of what the selection process is going
Sure.
to be, what options they have, and how
Yep.
we-
We could do that.
With that new menu, you can't have a drive-through then.
And I have a request, before our next meeting, could we get your revised standards list like we normally would for a standard planning commission meeting?
Yes.
Friday before, please, so we can
Yes.
go through it and review it
Mm-hmm.
and highlight and all that fun stuff.
Yep, that'll probably be regular staff report format with an attached ordinance.
That would be awesome. Thank you. Thank
I just didn't think we were far enough along for it this time.
you. Okay, good.
I was just going to second that. I need to read and really think about all this stuff, especially if we're really talking about these details beforehand. So anything and everything I would like.
John?
Thank you all very much for putting this together and allowing us to all participate. I think it's very important to this community.
Good.
Thank you.
Hopefully this casual atmosphere worked for everybody. Good, good. I'd like to set it up the same way for July.
Next time, okay.
That would be great. great, because I think it was great input from everybody. Didn't have to prompt too many people. All right, with that, we'll move on the agenda to public comment. This public comment item is to allow the public to provide general public comment and not for comment on individual action items contained on this agenda. Michelle, do we have any requests to speak forms?
No, we do not.
Is there anyone here who wishes to speak under public comment this evening who has not filled out one? With that, I will close public comment and accept a motion for adjournment. Done. Thank you. See you soon.